Hi, everyone. I'm Andrew from MITRE, and today I'm going to be talking about package URLs and their introduction into CVE. For anyone unfamiliar, package URLs are a specification for basically identifying the locations of packages found on package hosts. So this is a specification that's been around for a while. I know it's currently going through a standardization process with ECMA, but basically that we've adopted that standard and we'll be introducing it soon within CVE, where you can add package URLs to your CVE records. So with this addition, one of the first things to know is that at introduction, these are going to be optional. These are things that, as a CNA, you can add to and include in your CVE records once the next release is out, but you don't have to. And they're really intended to be sort of used as a complement to the existing identifier options that are in the CVE format. They're also intended, sort of the purpose of why bother adding these to the record format is really to make automated applicability decisions easier for CVE consumers. Obviously a key part of the sort of point of tracking vulnerabilities is so that vulnerability managers who own systems can, take action and make decisions about what they need to do with a vulnerability. But before they can do that and take action, they have to know, does this vulnerability apply to me? And part of the intention for package URLs is that they make doing that at scale via automation easier. That said, why are they useful? So right now, within the CVE record format, in the affected array, within those objects, there are these two fields, collection URL and package name, which together are intended to sort of express the same type of information that package URLs would be used for, which is basically a package on a package host somewhere. But unfortunately, although there are sort of, we give examples within the record format, there's a sort of sense of what should be in there, they are still free-form text, and that free-form nature makes it difficult to use them for automation. If you go and look through CVE records from the last few years, even just for something like identifying packages on GitHub with those fields, you'll find that there's just a lot of variety for how packages are encoded across those two fields, which then makes it more difficult to try and build automation off of. And that's just for something like someone identifying a source repository on GitHub, but of course there's an enormous amount of variety for different package hosts, and the intent is that package URLs sort of constrain that variety to make automation easier. As I said before, it's really trying to sort of solve this problem or make it easier to solve this problem of answering, am I affected by this vulnerability for vulnerability managers? The other piece is wanting to make it easier to cross-reference between CVE records and other materials, other systems, whether that's a software bill of materials, a software inventory. One of the pieces of feedback that we'd seen in the CVE survey earlier this year was just interest in, hey, we want to be able to have package URLs because we have these other systems, these other places where we're already using them, and just sort of drawing the connection between those package URLs that we already have that maybe, let's say, identify the software in our system, the open source software that we're using, cross-referencing that to CVEs was proving to be too difficult. So this was a key part of the motivation for why we want to add package URLs. Now, so what do they look like? They're URLs. They're basically, they have a schema that's package, PKG, and then the next piece is a type. So I've given a few examples here: gem, GitHub, Golang, PyPI. Basically, the PURL specification maintains a list of different types, which are reflections of different package hosts that are sort of supported within PURL, and each of those types then specifies what additional information you might add. So, for example, with the gem types, this is for Ruby gems, for the Ruby programming language, the next piece of information that you see is a package name. So like JRuby launcher is this first one, but it also allows additional information after the question mark. For example, platform equals Java. This is just an additional sort of piece of information that you can provide that is associated with that particular package. But you can see, like if you look at the Golang example here, that for the Golang sort of type, that there's a little bit more variety. You have google.golang.org/gemproto, which is the sort of package name, and then you have the hash used to identify a particular source path within that package. So there's as I said, a lot of variety. You can also see with the GitHub type that there are sort of two sections. There's the package URL and there's Perl spec section. The first one being the repository owner name, the second one being the actual name of the source repository. And I link also as well here just to provide the URL for the specification, which is up on GitHub. Like I mentioned before, it's in the process of going through formal standardization with ECMA. I believe the timeline that they've shared for when they expect to have the initial version of that standardized is somewhere toward the end of this year. At that point, I think we would be pointing more directly to the specification that's there, but for now, it's up on GitHub and tracked there. And what types of package hosts are included? I sort of broke them down into 4 different categories here. You have a variety of language-specific hosts. These are things like Ruby Gems or PyPI or NPM, basically package hosts that are specific to individual language ecosystems. There are also operating system-specific hosts, or I suppose I should say distro-specific hosts. There's a type for Debian packages. There's another one for Fedora packages, OpenSUSE packages, these sort of platform-specific ones. Also source repositories like GitHub and Bitbucket, and then also container images. You can refer to things that are hosted on Docker Hub. There are more than just this list here, but these are kind of the 4 categories that are currently reflected within the Perl specification. So I should say, actually, before moving on from that, one extra piece is there is a generic type. This is a sort of catch-all fallback within the Perl specification. Our general recommendation for CNAs is to prefer using one of the more specific types if it's at all applicable, and only fall back to general generic when there's no sort of more specific type to use. And also, this then becomes a nice piece of evidence to motivate the addition of more types to the type registry within package URLs to say, hey, look, we have this package host where there are vulnerabilities being reported for the package that's published on this host, and we want to be able to refer to it with a specific type rather than needing to use generic. So that becomes a nice source of feedback back to the package URL project. Sort of major question here is, how do these compare to CPEs? Obviously, CPEs, Common Platform Enumeration, are an identifier type that is already supported within the CVE record format. So whether you're using the CPEs array or the more recently added, I think at the sort of end of last year, early this year, CPE applicability structure, which was adapted from the NVD's schema. So CPEs, they've been around a long time and have proven to be very useful for identifying what I'll call products. Basically, most easy to use for commercial software, for things where there's a organization which is responsible for producing it, and it's basically a collection of metadata fields that you put together into this string, and which relies on this central CPE dictionary to basically sort of provide meaning to the information that you've placed into those strings. And that's maintained by NIST as part of their stewardship of both CPE and of the NVD. So, if you think of it like CPEs are identifying products, Perls are identifying packages. I note here that this is best for open source software, because when we're talking about package hosts, we're usually talking about places where open source software is distributed, like a Debian package or a source repository, things like that. A nice thing with Perls relative to CPE is that there is less of a reliance on a central taxonomy. While there is this sort of list of types, there doesn't need to be a list of individual packages. Effectively, the registration and sort of listing of packages is delegated to the types that are defined in the schema, because if we say like a type gem, then a package name is valid if it's a package which exists on the Ruby Gems registry. But yeah, basically you have CPE, which is identifying products, Perls, which are identifying packages, and you can imagine situations where you have sort of complementary mixes of these things. For example, you may have a vulnerability in a product which is itself has components that are affected by this vulnerability that are distributed as open source packages, which you could use a Perl to identify, where the CPE identifies the overall product. So these are complementary. This is, the introduction of Perls are not with the intent of eliminating other identifiers, rather, really recognizing a gap that exists within the identifier space without having something like Perls, which, as mentioned, was a big part of the feedback from the CVE survey earlier this year. So how do you actually add them? What does this look like? So Perls will be able to be added to objects within the affected array using this new package URL field. So what I gave here is just a very minimal example, but you can see it uses the existing collection URL and package name fields. And it says here, collection URL is the NPM registry site, and the package name is color, just a particular package on that host. And then the package URL becomes package:/npm/color. And then there's a versions array. I will say here, this is not indicative of any particular real vulnerability. I just chose color arbitrarily and the version number also arbitrarily. But just this would be an individual object within the affected array, which includes a package URL. One thing to note is that because the package URL field is optional, in order to meet the sort of minimum requirements for this object, you still need to provide a collection URL and package name. The way the constraints work on that type are basically that you have to either have a collection URL and package name or a vendor and product. You can have both, but at least one of those pairs is still minimally required. You can't have an object which only has a package URL. That would be rejected. So yeah, as it says here, their purls are optional and they must be accompanied by at least one of the existing types of required identifiers. The other piece is that the purl specification allows purl strings to contain a version number, which I omitted in the examples that I provided because we actually disallow this. We don't want and will not accept purls that have a version embedded in them. We want versions to still only be specified with the existing versions field, which is sort of the example here, where there's the versions field, which is an array of these version entries saying which versions are affected or unaffected. This is really just to continue having a consistent place for consumers of CVE data to get version information. We don't want to have a future where in order to understand what versions are affected or not affected, you have to sort of parse multiple pieces of the record to really, sort that out. We want it to be in one place, and so purls cannot contain a version. So purls will be able to be added to CVE records with the release of version 5.2.0 of the CVE record format. I think others, maybe Chris Coffin, would be able to better speak to what the schedule is looking like for that. I know that there was like a pre-release that's out on the CVE record format GitHub repository, but I don't know when the official planned release date is of 5.2.0. But when that is released, that's when use of package URLs would become officially possible within CVE records. Beyond that, I also just wanted to highlight if folks have interest in identifiers or have particularly maybe interested in other types of identifiers, the CVE Quality Working Group is still continuing to work on this identifier problem. One of the other pieces we've been looking at is better support for more granular identifiers, what we're calling artifact identifiers, to make it easier for CNAs to identify specific affected artifacts like released binaries or source files. There is an open proposal, a request for discussion, which I provide the link to here. It's on the CVE schema repository. This is still a proposal. It hasn't been accepted or rejected yet. And if folks take a look at that, have feedback, have thoughts, we'd love to hear it. If it's adopted, it would arrive in a future version separate from what we're doing here in 5.2. So that said, I think that covers everything. I'm happy to answer questions.
Hey, Andrew, this is Chris. So just to, and I'm probably giving too much away for tomorrow, but yeah, so we've currently got 5.2.0 in our test environment, and we're on track to put it into production on October 29th at this point. So
okay, great.
That's where we're headed. There was one question that stood out to me. I wanted to jump in, but somebody posted a question. So if I have a commercial product, use a CPE. If I have an open source, use purl. Does purl have the capacity to specify a commercial product that is not in a public repository?
So I think for that, you basically would probably need to fall back with purl to the generic type, which basically says like, here's a URL to go download the package and you can provide additional metadata. There is also a SWID type that I think sort of is designed to incorporate SWID tags. I'll admit that one is a thing that I think has the purl project themselves have not been super certain about what they want to do with that type, but that might also be an option if you are there's a project which uses SWID tags and you're wanting to sort of encode that within purl, but it's not generally like a recommended type to use. So I think in general, like falling back to the generic type and specifying the relevant metadata for whatever host it's on would be the thing to do. And I think for that, I wouldn't expect that in the future there would be like official types added for private repositories. So I think you would always sort of expect to use the generic type within purl for that.
Yep, and I'll add that I know from hearing Philippe Omberdon talk that there is, I guess, some thoughts of adding different types that may go beyond just packages.
Yeah, that's true. I know that they've been they've had some open proposals. I'm not sure of the latest status on that. It's been maybe a month since I checked in, but yeah, the Perl project continues to look at adding additional types that maybe take them beyond the current sort of scope of open source package repositories.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Get another question.
Yeah, so Paul, to your question, when I said that there's no versions, it's just that for encoding version information, don't do that within the Perl string itself. Use the versions field. So you're still fully able to specify version information in the way that you would today for a CVE record. That version information just can't go within the Perl. It goes within the versions field.
And Paul, the reason for that being that it could get really confusing as to how to interpret that. So better to keep the version information separate where it's already at in the affected array and just use the Perl to identify the product and anything else related to that product, with the exception of the version.
So, Mike, I'm not sure if it's Michael or Michelle. My apologies if I mispronounce your name, but for the question about why have Perls be part of the CVE rather than have it in a separate place, I will say, I mean, so we already have, even prior to this edition, a sort of Perl-like type of data with, as I mentioned, with the collection URL and package name field. And so this isn't so much adding a new type of thing. It's more adding a more consistent way of expressing information that we already had a much more free-form but kind of challenging to consume way of providing that information. So that's how I would view it. It's really taking a thing that was already present where you could reference specific, sort of packages on a host and just making that more consistent and easier to consume. And then, yeah, so Simon's question about what about when there's an open source software and a public freely downloadable commercial version of the vulnerable software, when there's both package downloads and other artifact downloads? So what I take that to mean is you're asking about the situation where you may have sort of both public, like open source software packages which are affected by a vulnerability, and also maybe private or commercial software which is affected by the vulnerability. I expect for that you basically would have different objects within the affected array which are separately identifying those sort of distinct pieces of software which are affected by the vulnerability, and that where Perl is applicable, for example, for the open source software, that you could use Perls within those specific affected array objects.
Yeah. I think it's just because we dual release OSS and commercial, and only putting something in for one and not the other when both are vulnerable is likely to confuse our customers rather than it might help the automatic scanners, but anybody looking at it's going to be more confusion than anything else. Anyway.
As far as they would be confused that Perls were not present in within some of the array entries where they were present in others, if I have that right?
Yeah, because if you got if there's the OSS and the commercial and they're both vulnerable, but only the OSS is listed in the Perl arrays, then it can lead to a wrong assumption.
Because Perl is embedded within each affected array entry, I don't think it would create that much of a difference, because I imagine you would still have, let's say in the pre-Perl world, you would have objects within the affected array which include a collection URL and package name for the affected open source software, which may not include those fields for the commercial software. So I feel like that difference would sort of already be present in how you're publishing information today.
Yeah, I mean, we're not publishing anything automatic, just straight up versions, and it's purely in the text, whether it's the OSS or not. So anyway, getting sidetracked and specific.
Thanks, everyone.